Greetings. In this video, we'll focus on Chapter 5, Sexual Predators, Paraphilias, and Murder. What I'd like to start with is looking at how your author defines sex offenders and sex predators. And so we see some differences there, and this is important not only from a clinical perspective and treatment perspective, but also risk assessment. But also you'll see that these terms become relevant and these ideas become relevant in the legal system as well. Sex offenders tend to commit fewer sex crimes than the sexual predators. The sex offenders usually have one or few victims, and often within the family, while the sexual predators are more likely to have multiple victims, both strangers and family members. The sex offenders are less of a threat to the community than the sexual predators. We also see less psychopathy among the sex offenders and more among the sexual predators. We also see less paraphilias among the sex offenders and more with the sex predators. And we also have a better chance at treatment with the sex offenders and lower rates of recidivism, while with the sexual predators we find that some may not be able to be treated, and treatment is very difficult, and also that there's higher rates of recidivism. Also, you'll find that there's a map that points out the registered sex offenders in the United States per 100,000 population. And I think that many criminologists and others would argue that we have to be very careful when looking at a map such as this, primarily because a lot of this is based on reporting and what gets reported to and entered within the system and how it's entered. And so this may be more of a graphic of the states that are more likely to enter data or to investigate these cases successfully and successfully prosecute them than it is of actual numbers. Remember, many sex offenders will not be processed through the criminal justice system. A paraphilia is basically paraphilias are basically sexual arousal or gratification through unusual fantasies and or behaviors. And so basically we have numerous paraphilias. In fact, we could have a whole course on the topic, so I'm just going to discuss a few. But first, we run into several definitional problems. First of all, sexual arousal or sexual gratification we have to define. But I think more difficult is defining unusual fantasies and or behaviors. And then the whole idea, what we want to know, paraphilias may or may not be illegal, and they may or may not, develop the idea of being bizarre, a lot being based on cultural norms. Let me give you an example. While someone may be sexually aroused by dirty, soiled underwear, and a vast majority of the population would probably find that to be disgusting, perhaps. But on the other hand, that someone who is sexually aroused to someone wearing, Victoria's Secret lingerie, to the lingerie in the person, perhaps this may not be viewed as deviant by cultural norms, but actually as acceptable and expected, at least in heterosexual relationships and maybe in other types of relationships as well. So again, for example, in lesbian relationships, that we have to look at how culture defines all this. And so we run into the whole problem in defining these terms. But we have the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Of course, the 5th edition is out now, DSM-5, and so I would refer you to the current edition. We have the previous edition in our textbook simply because the DSM-5 was recently published. So when we look at paraphilias, we see some other factors going on there. For example, sometimes we see non-human objects used for sexual arousal. But again, we run into definitional issues. For example, someone using a vibrator for sexual arousal, that would not be considered a paraphilia. But if someone was using, for example, let's say something that would be considered rather unusual, like a dead lobster, then that would be considered to be part of a paraphilia, very unusual, that is. And also we see repetitive sexual activity that may involve simulated or real humiliation or pain. But also we also see sexual activity or behaviors with non-consenting partners, and also with people who the relationship would be considered illegal. But then again, there are paraphilias that again, the context helps us define whether it's legal or illegal. For example, if someone goes to a strip club and watches topless dancers or totally nude dancers dance around the stage, that is legal in the United States in many jurisdictions. In contrast, if someone is looking through their neighbor's window through the curtains watching them undress, that would be highly illegal. And while one would be classified perhaps, a night at the topless bar, the other one could be classified not only as a crime but also as a paraphilia of voyeurism. And so we see these types of cases. So what we'll do in the next video is we'll review some of the paraphilias, and I'll point out some examples.